Welcome back, Scott. So
Morning, good morning.
we did some fat burning stuff for the last couple of videos. We did some over-the-counter stuff. We did some heavier stuff, and we kind of wanted to tap into things that becomes very popular, peptide use, essentially growth hormone, and maybe secretagogues as well, some CJC and ipamorelin and other things that longevity doctors prescribe because that's only things that they can legally prescribe, even though there are better things. Do you want to open up
Gold
what the
mine.
hell is growth hormone? Why is it used in aesthetics, maybe well-being, maybe health, whatever, and start from there, and then we kind of unwrap as the things go.
Yeah, sure. Well, growth hormone is a hormone peptide, 191 amino acid chain length. Um, we produce it endogenously, humans, usually around somewhere between 2 to 4 IUs per day. And then as you age, it starts to decline. I think it's somewhere around the third or fourth decade, you start to produce a little less, like maybe 1 IU every decade after that. Um, it's now very, very well accessible on the internet, a recumbent version. So basically a synthetic growth hormone. Um, Back in the 80s, I think it was when they were kind of like taking growth hormone, exogenous growth hormone from cadavers. It was incredibly expensive, thousands of dollars a week. The NFL was, a player would be spending on his growth hormone. Now you can get these synthetic versions for a few $100. So it's come a long way in the last 40-ish years.
Well, before you go there, I know that some of these longevity doctors will prescribe you for $300 a shot. So it's still in thousands. Their profit margins are amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I really truly believe that the providers around now, it's just legal drug dealing. Like I've heard prices for like testosterone vials being like over $100. Like that shit's worth pennies.
I've seen myself testosterone clinics will prescribe you a bottle of testosterone for 200 to $300 per bottle. You
That's
know, it costs
unbelievable.
probably $2 or $3 to make because
Yeah, yeah,
that costs that much. That fluid doesn't cost that much at all.
yeah. It's unbelievable. And so now we're seeing the same thing with these longevity doctors or these wellness people or whatever they're called. It's just legal drug dealing, and they're selling this stuff for unbelievable gains here. Like it's almost criminal. I mean, theoretically it should be, but they get away with it.
It's good for you, especially if you're not even going to go there. Otherwise, I'm going to get banned again for saying something what I want to say. Anyway, so wait, how did people came around that this thing can be used for health purposes? And I really think you need to unpack why the hell it's called growth hormone. Because let's be honest, you're not going to grow much from it.
Right. It's actually somatotropin hormone. I don't know when the name became growth hormone, and there was some change of language. I don't even know when, a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago, but it's somatotropin, and it basically prepares the body for growth. It doesn't really do much of the growth in itself. It just basically communicates to the liver. The liver then promotes or creates a certain amount of IGF-1, and that goes through the body and causes growth. Um, how it became so popular in sports, I have no idea where it originated from. I know that it was being used in team sports, especially in NFL and stuff like that back in the 80s, but it was very, very expensive. Once they discovered, that they could create this for cheap, it's come down and it's being used all over the place. I don't think it's really a coincidence that you see in the same sport certain players getting a decade longer in their career. For example, like Joe Montana and Tom Brady, like the reason Brady's going a decade longer in his career is because he had growth hormone at an earlier age, where when Montana was, his college years, it either probably wasn't quite discovered or it was so expensive they weren't using it yet. Because growth hormone, really, what its benefit is not so much growth, like you mentioned, but in its recovery abilities, in its almost bulletproofing you from injuries. So it's injury resilience over time. It's very good for that. And a lot of people claim it's the fountain of youth. There's very seemingly minimal risk, lots of reward under certain dosages, obviously, and it's prescribed in medicine for people that are growth deficient. So it has a lot of research behind it. Obviously, in my opinion, there is no risk-free drug use, but you know, at a reasonable dose, it's probably going to give you mostly nothing but benefit. So it's incredibly popular. It's now quite reasonably priced and available everywhere.
So talk me through about how does it work in a sense for fat loss? Because predominantly people will use is, well, people who understand how it works will use for body composition improvements, which means increasing lean muscle mass, decreasing body fat. So what does it actually do in a body to start the process or enhance the process, or what's happening there? Why is it so good for that purpose?
So when you administer growth hormone, exogenous growth hormone, it actually dumps substrates into the bloodstream. It mobilizes triglycerides. It puts glucose into the blood. So essentially, there is substrate in the blood floating around, ready to be utilized for something. Your body endogenously produces most of its growth hormone in bed while you're asleep. Um, and if you look at the sort of the demographic, it's highest in children. Children eat and sleep and have the biggest rate of growth out of all of us in any age group. It happens to be when you're younger, when growth hormone is highest, you're sleeping and eating the most. They're growing the most. So if you apply that to sports or body recomposition, if I apply growth hormone before bed, like my endogenous system would pulse it out normally, um, I'm not really moving much. In theory, I'm asleep. So if growth hormone is still going to mobilize substrate, but if I'm not moving around, that substrate is free to move around and be stored wherever it's being stored. And the body is determining where that's going to go. Where if you take it, which is why it's beneficial for things like recovery, because you're sitting there, you're sleeping, and all this substrate is put mobilized to the blood, and it's being delivered to where it has to go. So it's there to repair injuries or recover from a training session or to cause growth. Um, then if you were to apply it in the AM, which is how I would use it if somebody was interested in using it for more of a fat loss perspective, then the same thing happens. Growth hormone will always do what growth hormone does. It's just a matter of what are you doing when it's working. So if I apply it first thing in the morning, I mobilize the same substrates, but now I'm moving. So instead of them being shuttled to a different area to be stored, I'm actually potentially oxidizing them. So therefore, I can be getting dumping out storage and burning it off. So it gives an advantage for a fat loss scenario, but it's never an on off or all or nothing scenario, because growth hormone just does what it does. It just mobilizes substrate. It's what you're doing, your lifestyle, your habits, activity levels, etc., that are determining the final fate of that mobilized substrate. So if you're sleeping, it's going to go around and be restored somewhere to help recovery, help repair, whatever. If you're moving, it's going to mobilize, it's going to fuel the activity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on what other benefits could be there. Like, I know many years ago, Sylvester Stallone got caught with it. Well, suitcase of testosterone and growth hormone
Yeah.
when he was in Australia, and he said it was for his mom.
Amazing.
So what would his mom benefit from? Because obviously she's not hitting the gym. She's probably not interested into weight loss or whatever. Is there maybe some kind of cosmetic improvements? Is there maybe ability to recover tissues of any kind that are aging? Is there, like you mentioned already, a use serum effect from GH that can be observed by somebody who uses it?
So because of its regenerative properties and it's being deemed as the fountain of youth, it is going to be very good for things like joint integrity, connective tissue health and remodeling and repair, skin texture, skin elasticity, all these things. It is prescribed by many clinics for the elderly people for vitality. So it is offering a bunch of benefits in that sense as well. We all know that Stallone is amazing as I think he is. Most of that growth hormone was not for his mom, though some of it could very well have been. Um, but it does offer all those pros for sure. And then when it comes to a performance point of view or a anabolic point of view or whatever you want to talk about for a female, because it's not a sex hormone, you don't have the same virilization and masculinization risks that you would with an androgen like testosterone or anavar or something like that. So it is a very good tool to help increase muscle mass, although it's not great at that, but it does work, or to help increase fat oxidation while not potentially risking virilization.
So when you bring to that, is there a window of, let's say, exposure needed for anyone to start seeing benefits?
Um, that's going to be largely what you're using it for and the dose. For example, I have seen some research showing that the peak of fat oxidation after exogenous administration of growth hormone is somewhere in that 1.5 to 2 hour range. So you administer the growth hormone, you stay ideally in a fasted state because what you're trying to do is oxidize newly mobilized substrate, not providing it by eating. So you wait, you're fasted, you implement the growth hormone, and an hour to 2 hours later, you go and you exercise. I don't really know how accurate that is in terms of a timeline. I don't get that specific with my clients. I say if we are using growth hormone majority for the time, if it's for a fat loss purpose, we do it fasted, but I don't say wait 1.5 hours before you move because growth hormone is going to start taking effect very, very quickly, like within minutes. Now, when does it reach peak? Well, apparently it's 1.5 to 2 hours. I wouldn't marry that. I would just say, from a compliance point of view, get up, administer it, stay fasted, do the activity whenever that happens to be. If it's 10 minutes later or an hour later, don't worry about it too much, and then go and eat. I think that is, from a phallus point of view, that's sort of the timeline. If you're looking at it from a muscle building point of view, you're probably never going to really notice it unless you're taking large amounts, like 6, 8 IU boluses 1 or 2 times a day, maybe you would see things. But the thing is that it doesn't just specifically grow one thing. Like it's just basically allowing the body or promoting the body to grow in general. So you do see from growth hormone abuse, things grow like organs possibly. That's going to come from largely an abusive relationship with growth hormone. Um, but I wouldn't be using growth hormone for growth. I would be using it for fat loss and or recovery abilities in or off of an anabolic course or a bridge. Doesn't really matter. It has its place in both depending on what you're using it for, but I wouldn't be using it as its main role for growth. I'd be using its main role as injury resilience and repair, or in that fat loss scenario.
It seems like, personally, from what I see, is that anyone who uses growth hormone loses their grip strength.
Mm-hmm.
Like we see a lot of guys like hey, you always need to train with straps, and you're like, you probably need to take less GH and train your goddamn grip. And which brings me to simple thing is like, first of all, a lot of people will not even understand how you administer GH. Is it a pill form? You describe it's amino acid. Is it just a powder or something like that? And another thing is what comes to my mind is how can people test if their growth hormone is low? And if they do take growth hormone, how can they test if it's actually growth hormone, so to speak, or is it working? Is there something in the blood that we can pick up that, hey, I'm deficient, this might be the things for me? Or, hey, I'm not deficient, but I took this thing and it's working. I'm going to carry on and it does whatever this he's supposed to do. So maybe break down, first of all, what is the way how to use it. Is it pill form? Is it powder? Is it whatever else? And then, is there any way how to check if someone is deficient in it? And if not, is there any way how to check if them taking it is actually beneficial for them?
Mhm. Um, Growth hormone is going to come in a freeze-dried powder in a vial, and then you're going to have to reconstitute it with bacteriostatic water or something, in a pinch. If you were stuck at the airport with your mom's growth hormone and desperately needed an injection, you could use contact solution. But I mean, theoretically, backwater reconstitutes it. You don't want to shake the vial because the amino acid, the 191 amino acid chain, it's quite fragile. It's almost like a snowflake. And if you shake the vial, you could be breaking off crystals from that chain, and it basically just renders it less and less potent.
So
Um,
is that the only way? Is it only available as a form of injection?
I've only seen it as a form of injection, and I know that they're also working on a long-acting one. I have never seen any other method. I
Right.
can't say it's not available any other way. I honestly don't know, but I've only ever known it as an injection
Yep.
via pens or vials that you reconstitute yourself. So typically you're doing a sub-Q shot just underneath the skin, like a diabetic would with his insulin. Um, and then what was the other question?
What about testing? How can someone
Oh,
determine
right,
that
right.
they might be deficient in growth hormone?
What happens in the lab is they'll either check growth hormone levels and or IGF-1 levels to give an idea, and then you might have some physical cues or clues, I should say, that hey, maybe there's some hormone deficiency, but it's usually recognized when you're young and as you're going through puberty and stuff. If things aren't developing as they theoretically should, they might be looking into that. An adult that's already fully grown wasn't deficient, so now if they're trying to see, they would be looking at either growth hormone values and or IGF-1 um, to know if your growth hormone is real or not. The best way would be to literally get the vial tested from a lab. You'd sacrifice the vial because they're not going to return it, but then they would give you a printout of this is the purity of it, because it is available. Like, I mean, go on whatever Alibaba or eBay or whatever, and there'll probably be thousands of growth hormone distributors. There will be legitimate growth hormone there, but there will be a lot of stuff that is not as well.
Yeah, but
So if
in a
you want,
thousand you might hit.
yeah, you might. So if you want to know, you won't pay much because it really isn't that expensive. But you want to make sure it's real. You'll want to get that vial itself tested, and then you'll know if your stuff is pure or not, or how pure it is. But then if you want to see via blood work if it's working, you probably don't want to check growth hormone levels, because when you administer it exogenously, it takes effect so quickly. You literally have to walk into the lab, draw bloods, and even then, you may have missed that opportunity to see what it's doing. Better would be to know what your IGF-1 levels are, and then after a few weeks or so of regular growth hormone use, recheck your IGF-1, and you're going to see an elevation. That would tell you if it's working or not. If you tested the vial and it was growth hormone, you don't need to check your blood to know if it's working or not, because if it's growth hormone, it is working. It can't not. Um, but if you don't want to do that or can't do that or don't have the means to do that, what you'll notice with growth hormone, even at low dose, 1 or 2 IUs, which is typically, I don't go much higher than, 3 or 4 typically. And that's weight dependent usually. Females, 1 to 3. 3 has been the max. Men, I usually around 2 to 4, give or take. If you administer it at night, you're going to notice an improvement in sleep very quickly, maybe even the first night. You'll also wake up feeling a bit groggy, but then once you're awake, you're going to realize that, yeah, you're sleeping better. That might take a little longer to realize. Um, the other thing you're going to see is fingernails seemingly to be trimmed more frequently. Hair needs to be trimmed more frequently or shaved. That kind of stuff is what you'll notice. You won't notice strength and size from low dose growth hormone. You're going to notice other things. Um, you might notice on blood work a change in your insulin sensitivity because growth hormone can cause an increase in insulin resistance, but that's usually not an issue for athletes because we're not insulin resistant. So I wouldn't worry about it, but you could use that as a marker of a trend to see. Um, and the other thing is you mentioned grip strength because it does cause some water retention and neuropathy. And usually it's noticed first in your hands. That's usually dose dependent. What I do, and I learned this from Broderick from Team Eagle GSP, is a 5 day on, 2 day off approach. I like the thinking behind that. I do have a few clients that use it every day. One of my clients is a medical doctor, and he uses his growth hormone literally every day. We don't ever veer off it. But that was his preference, and I have no issues with it. But I do like the 5 on, 2 off approach because it allows us some time to discover what is it doing when you're on it and what does it look like when you're off. Because if it does cause a little bit of water retention, we will see how much that 1 or 2 pounds that you put on looks on your body because we're going to be assessing, and you'll see it on the scale, 1 or 2 pounds, and that's pretty common to see that. I've never had a client that experienced any sort of real detrimental neuropathy in their hands at 1 or 2 IUs. I have not seen that. I've heard of that, but I have not seen that. I've seen that with 4 or 6. So typically that's not really an issue, but the water retention you do see. So with females, because we're always, maybe not always, but very often concerned with scale weight, we make them know that there could be a little bit of water retention from growth hormone, especially if we're administering PM versus AM. So if you're taking it Monday to Friday, Saturday morning would probably be your biggest body weight. Monday morning would probably be your lightest, and we can just kind of start tracking those trends, just to keep them aware of what's happening and why.
So I guess you just highlighted the importance to understand that if you're using it for body aesthetics purposes, scale might not be your best friend here.
Never is when it's body aesthetic purposes.
You're selling it really hot. Cheap, cheerful, millions, benefits, skin looks better, hair
Yeah.
grow, whatever the hell there is. What are the health risks?
So that's the $1 million question because in a therapeutic type dose, the risks don't really seem to be known other than because it causes cellular growth in general, it's not specific. There could be a risk of other cells that you don't want growing, like, for example, cancer being exacerbated by growth hormone. So if you have cancer, I wouldn't recommend we use it. Now, interestingly enough, I do have a client that has cancer, and she does use growth hormone, and her oncologist does say it doesn't matter. They are aware that she uses it. They are not concerned. They don't think it's a factor. I personally wouldn't take the chance. If I knew I had cancer, I would not take a growth factor. Common sense tells me no. Can I prove that? Of course not. So that to me is the only real known risk, and it's not really proven. There is some controversy to that theory, so it's hard to say. I guess it's that risk reward scenario. Now, there is a fragment of growth where they've chopped off some of that 191 amino acids and they've only used a fraction of it. And that seemingly does still stimulate the mobilization of substrate, but doesn't have the same growth factor. So that could be a scenario, but I think at that point now you're starting to get real niche and it's not necessary. And the same thing goes with all the secretagogues like ipamorelin and CJC and all these things. They're essentially all doing what growth hormone does, but they're chunks of it or, variations of it to me, and they're probably even being sold for way more than what you can get growth hormone for because the providers are allowed to sell it and they're going to just mark it up a ton. I would always just sort out growth hormone and use that and have all of its benefits and what seemingly is not really much of a risk, again, if you're not abusing it.
You touched up a little bit about insulin resistance with GH. Something I see with pretty much everyone who's using GH secretagogues like ipamorelin, CJC, and whatnot. Their longevity doctor will always prescribe them metformin instead of telling them just be more active. This is how you deal with insulin resistance. So what are the risks and why does GH use cause insulin resistance?
It's just a factor of how it's playing on the organs in the body. And especially if you're typically with endogenous growth hormone, the pulses are happening at night when you're not active. And if you're exogenously administering more growth hormone, your body is theoretically endogenously producing, around 4, and then you go and you're putting in more and you're just lying there asleep. It's just a lot more burden on organs and there's not a lot of activity happening because you're asleep. I think the providers are providing more drugs with it because it's just more ability to make money. I mean, I know here in Canada, if you go to a TRT clinic, you will be prescribed TRT, but you will also be suggested to take an AI and some sort of cholesterol medication with it all at the same time before they even bother checking anything. It's just almost like bulletproofing the drug by giving you a couple other drugs. So this one gives you its benefits, and these risks will be tackled by this drug, and then those risks will be tackled by this drug. And so they just kind of layer it on, and your bill is whatever it is, $500, $1,000, whatever it costs. And that's mostly all profit for the provider. I would much rather see people implement one thing, understand what they're doing, understand what they're taking, how it works, and why they're using it, first off, and then measure its effects realistically and via blood work or whatever it is you're checking, and make an adjustment based on that. Not just throw in this, and because I'm taking that, now I should take this and this and this, because now when you do have a problem, you don't really know what's causing what. I see this with HRT females all the time. They're prescribed testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone all at once. Here's your stuff, take it. Now let's see you back in 6 months or 3 months or whatever, and you pay a fortune. And then they have symptoms. Well, half the symptoms are common amongst all 3 hormones. So which of the 3 is causing it? Now we don't know. So we start guessing, we start moving this one and moving that one. And all these women have, unfortunately, is fluctuating hormones going all over the place. And they can't figure out the symptoms because their bodies aren't even getting an opportunity to adjust. It's constantly being fluctuated. So I would much rather see somebody just take it, try it, measure it, and then adjust based on real world results. That's always my approach.
Yeah, that's a big one I see as well with TRT clinics. They even give injectable anastrozole inside the testosterone, so it all comes in one vial.
Wow.
And then obviously they suggest you some HCG, some Clomid, then
Yeah.
some something for erectile dysfunction. God knows why the hell do you need erectile dysfunction tablets when you're on testosterone. But if you crush your estrogen, obviously you'll need something. Uh, but yeah, essentially a lot of them create problems that shouldn't be there
Mhm.
by overdoing stuff and just charging you more money by hiding it under health. Even
Yep,
though
absolutely.
there was this big outcry about how TRT is bad for your health, and suddenly it's the best thing you can do for your body. Go figure.
Well, I mean, like it wasn't that long ago where marijuana was the worst thing in the world, and now it's literally legal. And where I live, there's fucking marijuana stores everywhere. Like the last thing that I want to see is a whole bunch of potheads running around. Like, like I just for life me, I remember when I think I was 20, I went backpacking to California. Don't ask me why, but I did. And I remember in this hostel I was in, there was these two guys that were there on the beach. They're in the hostel with me, but they were on the beach every day collecting email addresses. And for every email address they got that was valid, they got a quarter. And
Oh,
these guys were stoned. And what the email address was trying to legalize marijuana. And to this day, in my junk mail, that email will still come through because those guys got so many quarters that they were living in California in a hostel making quarters to try to get people to legalize marijuana. It was the craziest thing. And now here we are 20 years later, it's legal. It's
and
ridiculous.
yeah, it's interesting. And alcohol is still one of the biggest killers on the planet, and it's still legal.
And now here in Canada, they've just made it legal. It's in every gas station now. Used to be you had to go to the liquor store. Now it's everywhere. I've now seen people walk out of the gas station at 10 o'clock at night with a six pack. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's going backwards, sounds by the sound of
Oh,
it.
yeah. 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 They're begging
So,
for Purging Day.
is there anything similar to GH? We already discussed secretagogues, your ipamorelin, CJCs, and some other peptides that are still coming out. And is it worth going that route, knowing what you just said, that essentially there is, bear in mind, very important part, if you are understanding what it does and you don't overdo it, because let's be honest, you can end your life with aspirin. So you're probably not going to end your life with GH, but overdoing it will still cause some harm. Is there essentially really a need for anything else than growth hormone if it's doesn't seem to have many, if any, bad effects on human body at all? Making
I
sure
think
that you don't overdo it
I think
again.
it depends what someone's trying to achieve. I mean, I work with a lot of athletes and not just aesthetic people that are trying to look a certain way, but actually people that perform. And growth hormone is one of the things that I'm a big fan of across the board. There's not too many scenarios where I don't think it's a good idea, but I do think it's dose dependent for sure. But it depends on the goal. If someone's trying to put on muscle, growth hormone's not going to come anywhere near as beneficial as an anabolic steroid. Like it's not even going to come in the same world.
And again,
Um,
what you specifically highlight is muscle growth, not
yes,
muscle health, muscle recovery, or joint
right.
integrity, whatever. It's pure lean muscle mass will grow quicker with whatever the hell you choose that's specifically designed just for that.
Absolutely. For lean contractile tissue hypertrophy, an anabolic androgenetic steroid trumps this all of it. All the SARMs, all the everything, that's your winner. Um, in my opinion, anyway. But growth hormone has lots of benefits. Again, dose dependent. I do think it's good for females because females are so sensitive to androgenic steroids that we can get some decent muscle growth from growth hormone over time. But more importantly, it's keeping them healthy, at least their joints healthy over time. And that's going to yield more time in the gym or under the bar if growth is the goal. And it's just not seemingly going to offer any of the masculinization or virilization type risks. And from a health point of view, there isn't really any known certainties of risk from growth hormone if you're taking, one or two IUs. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're 30 or 40 years old and your body endogenously is starting to produce a little less, you can just bridge that gap. I think you're going to see more benefits than harm for sure with that theory. I have not seen any issues. The one client that I've had now, I've only been working with people using growth hormone for the last little over a decade. 25-ish years ago when I started coaching, I didn't have anybody using growth hormone, but that was also in the late 90s, and it was wildly more expensive and harder to find. But nowadays, the only time I thought we better not use that is with my one client that literally had or has cancer. But her oncologist and her professionals said, nah, don't worry about it. You're fine. So she continued to use it, and she's monitored by them. So that kind of took it off of my hands. But other than that, I don't see it really being much of an issue, um, as long as you understand what you're using it for.
And you keep referring to uh, effects of it, that the muscle mass, fat burning, and so, which links me to asking you, does it have any effect on thyroid?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any direct effect on thyroid, but because of its mobilize it, unless you are aware of something, um, but its ability to mobilize substrate is always going to have an effect on all of our organs to some degree. But is there a direct interaction between growth hormone exogenous use and thyroid? That I'm not too sure, actually. Do you know? I don't.
I know that the biggest dudes will always look up on their thyroid values when introducing GH, and they will try to kind of play around with either T4 or T3 to offset any kind of insulin resistance and all those kind of effects that might happen. So this is why I probably would ask you the last question before I let you off, because I'm mindful of your time. Is there any kind of blood markers other than GH and IGF-1 that you would suggest people to take before, during, and after, let's say, course of GH use if they chose to do one? Would it be
Um,
HbA1c, for insulin resistance and so on and so forth?
yeah, that'd be the one. I would say the people that were looking at thyroid with growth, probably body size overall. But yeah, A1C would be a good marker to check if you're using growth hormone.
So would you look at anything else at all, or does it not matter? Would it just be that purely insulin resistance, or would you check like glucose or insulin or fasted measurements of any of those?
So you could check triglycerides because triglycerides should increase if exogenous growth hormone is in play because it's mobilizing substrate. You could check glucose because that should be also increased because you're mobilizing substrate. But again, I think it would kind of come down to the context of the person. And I typically have blood work done ahead of time, anyways. I don't have a specific blood panel done for growth hormone, but I have a blood panel done before any exogenous hormonal use of any kind, and then we monitor it. But specifically for growth hormone, A1C is good, triglycerides is good, glucose is good. Um, did I say triglycerides? And then IGF-1 and growth hormone. Those are all metrics you could look at if you're wanting to know what your exogenous GH is doing.
But essentially, it goes back to like my approach is always check as much as you can, as much as you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Not as expensive as people make it out to be. I just ordered mine blood tests again because I do mine every 3 months, and I've had this conversation sometimes in a gym where people go like, "Yeah, why should I do a blood test? I'm not taking anything." I'm like, "Why do you take your car to MOT? You crushing it
Right.
every single day? You still need to check if it works. Like it's more
100%.
important to actually check it if you don't take anything. So you know if there is nothing wrong already.
Yeah,
So."
100%. I 100% agree. And I'm the same way. And I think as long as you understand the context of when that blood was drawn, you continue to repeat that so you can compare an apple to an apple. Otherwise, you get lost in the weeds. It's very difficult to figure out what's what if you don't know when you're checking your bloods, especially with females in the menstrual cycle.
Yeah. Standardizing your blood test routine, and even like body. Now lately, I have to find with people to standardize a body composition routine checks.
Right.
Like
Yep.
whatever the hell, even the DEXA scan can be wrong.
Yep. 100%. Yep.
But yeah, awesome, Scott. Thank you so much for your time. This has been really
No,
good
thank you.
stuff, and I'll see you in our next video.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.